the session emailed out to you afterwards, along with a copy of the slides from the session as well. We will be taking questions during the session too. We're using the Q&A function for that. So if you have a question coming up, drop it into the Q&A that you'll find a link to at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So do hang on till the end to get your questions answered, but you can drop them in at any point. All right, so I want to welcome our guest here today. So Chris Wilkinson is the CEO of Nordux, a drug and alcohol testing firm. Chris has over a decade of experience working in the alcohol, drug, occupational health, and fitness for duty industry, supporting companies across North America in a variety of industries, including trucking, transit, aviation, oil and gas, manufacturing, construction, mining, utilities, forestry, natural. The list goes on forever and ever, Chris. This is huge. Chris is also a certified train the trainer and published training author. And Chris is here to talk with us today, obviously, about drug and alcohol testing. So Chris, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Much appreciated. Do you want me to share my
So
screen?
yeah, we'll turn this over to you. You can launch into things and get going.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much for attending today. Um, well, I'll do a little intro of Nordrugs. Obviously, Michael did an intro for myself. Nordrugs is a drug and alcohol testing company that focuses only on the transportation industry. And that's what makes us unique in this industry, because as you heard the list of industries that I've worked in, there's drug and alcohol testing across a very broad and vast areas. Even in the U.S., you could have Walmart greeters are tested for drugs. So we're talking every spectrum people could be tested, but with Nordrugs, we are just focusing specifically on the transportation industry. Now, the topic today that I'm going to be presenting on is oral fluid versus urine drug testing. And the idea here is to help give companies, third-party providers, collection sites, insurance companies, a better understanding of what this means. Like, why are we having this discussion? We're going to talk about that. And then a look behind the curtains, understanding the difference between the two, some of the challenges, and helping companies make this decision when the time comes. All right. Because the question comes up is, if you're a company and you're going to drug test your employees, do you want to test them with a urine sample, or do you want to test them with an oral fluid sample? There is hair samples as well, and I get the question about blood too. Blood is too invasive for occupational testing, and hair comes with its own challenges and limitations. So the most common testing methods are these two, urine and oral fluid, with urine being the absolute dominant in this industry for a long time. So now we're going to talk about why we're here. Like, let's talk about the information I'm going to share to get you prepared for understanding it. The U.S. government is going to be implementing a drug testing change where they're going to say you can do oral fluid or urine testing at some point. To understand this change, though, and understand what you as a company want to do, let's look at a timeline, a history on drug testing, specifically in Canada. But as you can see here, it's U.S. Department of Transportation in Canada. The reason why I have that statement in there, which is a bit of an oxymoron, is this is a U.S. government program that we're talking about, but it's in Canada. Why is a drug testing program overseen by the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Transportation, under the FMCSA regulations? Why is it relevant in Canada? And the reason why it's relevant in Canada starts with 1996. And in 1996, this is when the US government implemented their drug testing program for commercial truck drivers. This comes under the regulations 49 CFR parts 40 and 382. And any trucking company out there knows that these regulations exist because they have to randomly drug test their drivers in the US, pre-employment testing, post-accident testing. In 1996, the U.S. government informed the Canadian government of this change. And they said, we're going to be requiring truck drivers in Canada who cross into the US to also abide by these rules and regulations. 2 years later, in 1998, it became the standard practice then that any commercial driver in Canada crossing into the US who falls under the three classifications under FMCSA would have to be randomly drug tested, pre-employment drug tested, post-accident, and they have to comply with those regulations. Because the Canadian government and the Canadian industries didn't have their own standards for doctor requirements, lab requirements, training requirements, testing panels that didn't exist in Canada. The Canadian government said, okay, fine, put this in place. It's not a problem. We're not creating one of our own. It became the basis for all drug testing in Canada, is that we follow the US regulations. And all of our literature and our case law, including the case law in 2003, was all about the US government's program and Canadian drivers crossing into the US. And this set the stage that all drug testing programs will follow and abide by the rules set by the US. So when we talk about drug and alcohol testing in Canada and the US, it's all built on the same foundations and regulations. And we just follow, essentially in Canada, what the US has created. So when the changes come into effect in the US, obviously they come into effect in Canada as well because of this. When we fast forward to 2013, now in Canada, this is where random testing got its first big challenge back. And it was urine testing. The employees of this paper mill, who are supervised employees, were being randomly drug tested. And it was determined in this case that that was too invasive. It was unnecessary to have to drug test randomly supervised employees. And coming up through school, this is also a big case law case that we heard about a lot. Oh, you can't randomly test people in Canada. The answer is you can, just not supervised employees, such as a manufacturing environment. But that was urine testing as well, which has a much longer detection, which we'll get into later on in the presentation. In 2017, we have the Toronto Transit Commission, who implemented their own random testing program for their drivers of vehicles and people in safety-sensitive positions. This was challenged in courts, in the lower courts of Ontario, saying that it's too invasive, it's unnecessary. But it was decided in the lower courts of Ontario that there's enough evidence and enough public risk for people in the largest transit system in Canada that this is potentially necessary, to the point that they decided to implement it and review the statistics and information. But this program wouldn't have gone through. They said if it was urine, it had to be oral fluid because of a shorter detection window, leading us more into this conversation of urine versus oral fluid. In 2019, Suncor and Unifor came together in an agreement which battled out for years, though, went all the way to the highest level of courts in Canada to decide whether or not random testing should take place in northern regions of Alberta, called Wood Buffalo region, very safety-sensitive environment. And in the end, they decided they would go with urine and oral fluid testing program. So they mixed it all up, including instant testing, lab testing. So they just were a mixed bag of all kinds of different things. Then we get back to transportation. And in 2021, West Can Bulk, which is a company based out of Western Canada, who operates in the US, operates all across Canada, thousands of drivers in their fleet. They had a random testing program in place for their Canada-only drivers. They knew that the US drivers had to be tested randomly based on 49 CFR Part 40 and 382 regulation requirements. They decided to go beyond that and test their Canada-only drivers as well, or drivers who did not meet the FMCSA requirements. And their program in Canada, they went with oral fluid testing because of the detection window. And the detection window being much shorter, thought fit better with the Canadian landscape, environment, human rights, and the courts agreed. The court said, yes, this company did the program right. They had policies, procedures, training, communications. Everyone was treated fairly. Everybody knew the program existed. The risk exists to do drug testing for truck drivers in Canada and the US, all across the border. And they said oral fluid, because it has a shorter detection window, it doesn't infringe on the person's ability to consume maybe legal substances now, like marijuana, and affect their ability to be employed as well. So oral fluid got another big thumbs up. TTC, Toronto Transit Commission, and then U.S. Canada case. And just to go one step further, I mentioned at the beginning that the Canadian government had no regulated drug testing programs leading up to all the way to 2023. The federal government in Canada finally created their own drug testing program called the Nuclear Commission Drug Testing Program. And it was for safety critical positions. So it's the first time in Canada now that we actually have a federally regulated, just like the US does, drug and alcohol testing program. Big picture of the information to help us talk about the drug testing program that we're looking at here, which is the U.S. Department of Transportation. Now, I'm a Canadian running a Canadian company, running a U.S. regulated program. So it kind of seems like, again, a bit of an oxy there, but the idea is everything in Canada that we develop and understand and have to read and learn and education all comes from the U.S. programs. All right, so why are we here then? We're here talking about U.S. DOT drug and alcohol program, specifically to start with, and the fact that they have approved the use of oral fluid samples. It was being urine since 1996. But in June of 2023, they came out and said, you know what? There's enough science, there's enough information. We are going to approve the use of oral fluid testing. And everybody got excited. This has been talked about longer than I've been in the industry, by the way. The government, especially in these drug testing programs that I'm involved in, they do not move fast. They're very slow at getting these programs going. There is 20 years, like in this case, say 20 years for other programs. Like it takes a long time. And we were all excited, but you have to temper expectations because then they came out with a statement and said, not yet. Say, hey, it's approved, but not yet. You got to wait. All the process had gone through. They had this ask questions where you could notice a proposed rulemaking stage. They went through that. They had all the comments and questions come back. And they came out and said, okay, everything's good. We've written the regulations, which they have. They've actually written the oral fluid regulations. But they said not yet because there's no labs in North America, Canada or US, that are ready to do this testing at the lab. The labs need to be 100% accurate. They need to be SAMHSA certified. They need to go through health and human services reviews and approvals. And nobody can get there. This has been a huge challenge, like a massive challenge. In talking to the labs, they continue to say we're not 100% accurate with the technology and the solutions and everything that we have. The science isn't there. This has obviously put a downer on this topic for a little bit of time now, because if the labs say, I don't know if we're ever going to get there based on the current technology, then you would say, then this program is not going to happen. And we're just going to stick with urine testing. But then just recently, there was a big announcement saying that the short version of this is they're opening up new technology. The government is now looking at allowing for new technology to be cleared through this FDA 510K clearance section. To be able to have labs, you get new technology and implement it fast, not having to go through this very long government approval process. And the idea is now with this opportunity, if this does get finalized, that labs will be able to acquire their own equipment and be able to test it based on the equipment and solutions they have to then prove that it's 100% accurate. It's still a little ways away, but we are getting closer because of this major hurdle that the lab said our technology isn't working. We aren't 100% accurate, but now they're saying there are other solutions out there that they're going to be able to test and trial to get this program moving forward. So then we're back to the question again. Okay, if this is actually happening and we believe it's finally going to come forward in the US regulated program, then companies that are US regulated, trucking companies, are going to have to ask themselves the question, is it urine, oral fluid, or what? What's the difference? What can I make my decision based off of? If you're not a trucking company or you're not US regulated and you're attending this, you want to understand the differences between urine and oral fluid, potentially for risk level, insurance risks, safety risks, You also want to understand it from a Canadian perspective for non-US regulated drivers. Hey, what should I be considering if I want to test my Canada only drivers? Or if you're in the US and you have drivers who are not in a federally regulated program or employees, what could you test and why? But here's the big question, urine versus oral fluid. Now we're going to have a look behind the curtains. All right, number one, talk about urine testing. Urine testing has been around, we'll say from 1996 with the US regulated program, and it hasn't changed much. Collection sites and labs, they're all still the same. The hours of operation seems to be getting worse. You see 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. at a third-party collection site, and sometimes now it's 10 a.m. till 12. 2-hour window of testing. And this is starting to become more common, where we really are trying our best as an industry, as a third-party administrator, to get better collection sites. But there's still the challenge of having drivers go to a collection site, have to produce a sample, they have a shy bladder. Obviously, this is definitely not how it actually happens at a clinic. This is just for comedic value. But this image is how people think it, is that it's gross. People don't want to become third-party collection sites. When I talk to trucking companies, a lot of them don't want to do in-house collections. They don't want to collect pee because of the stigma. It's gross. And it's hard to find collection sites. It's hard to get drivers in appointments. In Canada and US, there's so much testing locations. It's a lot easier, but you still have the challenge with locations, availability, truck parking, hours of operation, and the stigma around urine. Another big challenge with urine testing is that it is very easy to cheat. And people who want to or need to cheat a test and have the proper time and preparation can research. They can find ways to cheat a urine test. Now, this obviously powdered lime doesn't work. It's not there, okay? It's just, again, a joke, but it really is an industry full of professional drug users. And that's a huge concern with urine testing programs. The positivity rate is higher in oral fluid than it is in urine, even though the detection window is much shorter, which I'll get to a graphic which showcases that a little bit better, and then a study that explains that. But it is a very easy program, unfortunately, drug test to cheat. And that's where I said, welcome to the world of professional drug users. You can Google how to beat a drug test. And that's what I did here. I just Googled it. And as you can see, in less than a second, there were 50 million results. And there are ways that they can do it quick. Hey, I'm in a bind. I need to do this fast. How to pass a test quick. What can I do now? What's the process? There are procedures in place to try to catch the cheaters. There are requirements by the collector to manage the integrity of the collection process. So there are 10 steps into managing and maintaining the integrity of the collection process based on US regulations. Collection sites are supposed to do that. The lab has its own process and procedures for analyzing samples to see if they're too dilute, with too much water, or if there's a foreign substance, substituted samples, not human urine, a lot of different things that could come up. So the lab analyzes for certain things, and the collection sites are there to identify certain things. But people who want to cheat these tests know how to, and they come to work just like substance users who know that they're using drugs while working, and they make that conscious decision to use drugs or alcohol while driving a truck or while working. They come to work prepared every day. How am I going to hide this? And I do other education sessions on professional drug users in the workplace and explaining what they do to be able to hide their signs or symptoms, to be able to mask the effects at the times that they need to. This is the next level. This is them knowing exactly what to do, how to do it, when the time comes that they need to be selected for a test, and preparing for that appropriately and being ready to beat you. That's their idea. It's not, I need to maybe think more about how I'm a risk on the road or risk in the workplace, or maybe how this is affecting my life. No, how am I going to beat my company's drug testing program? Did it again. And that's the world they live in. They live in this world where they're happy that they beat your program. But with oral fluid testing, it's a much as you can see in the imagery here, it's a much cleaner kind of process. And with urine testing, they go into a bathroom, you're collecting a urine sample, it's in a cup, you pour it into the tubes, you package it up. No one wants to handle urine. So again, there's the stigma and the challenge that we face with actually getting collectors to do the job. With oral fluid, you hand the swab to the employee, the driver, and they swab their own mouth in front of you. You don't need a bathroom, you just need a dedicated space, semi-private to private location. They swab their mouth, they get enough oral fluid. The blue indicator tip, as you can see in the middle icon there, in the middle image, will indicate when there's enough oral fluid collected. You package it up in the tube, and then you seal it and you send it off. There's very little cheating to no cheating that we can find with these programs at this point. It still is relatively new, and we'll talk about that with the good and the not so good about these two programs. But it does, in this case, it is a lot simpler and a lot easier to do these tests in a lot of different locations. Now, based on what I've said so far, you would probably think that I am a 100% pro oral fluid. I talked about case law cases in Canada, the history behind it, talked about the stigma, the challenges, the cheating with urine, and that oral fluid is a very simple and easy program. But there are good and bad to both programs. It's not a perfect solution. And we're going to go through those now. Okay. All right, we'll talk about the good first. Now, with the good, with urine, it's got the longest history. So it's the gold standard in the industry, longest testing history. It's been around, it's been defended in a number of case law cases. The federal government runs it in the U.S. The Canadian government has adopted it for their program now. In Canada, it's blanketed through all these different case law cases, as well as guidance documents, including the Human Rights Commission's documentation per province, as well as the Federal Human Rights Commission. So you've got a lot of supporting literature around urine testing. There's a strong infrastructure as well across North America to be able to do this testing. Collection sites is the biggest thing. If you say, hey, can I do an oral fluid program tomorrow? You would have to go, where are all the collection sites that you need? And let's see if you have coverage. With urine, you'd say, yeah, there's testing sites, thousands. There's probably 4,000 testing sites in the US, and there's probably 200 in Canada to do urine testing right now. But how many have oral fluid? So that infrastructure across the North America is substantial. You also have a longer detection window with urine compared to oral fluid. Now you'll see that as good and bad on both sides, but the longer detection window for certain substances is a significant pro. Where it comes to marijuana might be the biggest negative that we face, and I will talk about that a little bit more with the detection windows. Urine, because it is the most common test, it's got the biggest infrastructure, it's been around the longest, it's the least expensive test. And by a fair bit, there is a significant increase in cost going to oral fluid compared to urine. Hair takes it even further if a company wanted to get to that level, but you go urine, oral fluid, and hair testing, but it is a significant jump. So in an industry where people are always looking at costs, cutting costs, saving money, switching to an oral fluid program would actually increase the program's cost significantly. And with urine testing, there's nothing being inserted into the person's mouth. They're urinating into a cup, so they're voiding into the cup. So none of the products that are being used have to be FDA or Health Canada approved, where oral fluid products do have to go through those because now you're asking somebody to take a product and put it into their mouth. So there's a big difference there. With oral fluid testing, there used to be two companies. I won't say the names of them, but there was two companies that were producing these oral fluid swabs. One of them ended up not going out of business. And it was because they found that there was an animal byproduct being used in the device or in the solution, and it did not meet FDA approvals. So it ended up losing its FDA approval, but it would be used for a very long time by a lot of people leading up to that. Once it lost FDA, lost Health Canada approvals, and then it's not, I don't believe it's around anymore. Now there's really just one primary company that creates these. So it's a bit of a monopoly right now in the oral fluid testing market. All right, oral fluid. With oral fluid, because you're doing collections, essentially looking at somebody, it removes that opportunity for them to go into a bathroom with urine testing, like urine testing, and tamper with the sample. You watch them swab their mouth. It's an observed collection from start to finish. There's no bathrooms that are required. You can collect anywhere, so long as it's a private or semi-private environment, to be able to do that test. Now you don't have a shy bladder situation to deal with because you're just swabbing someone's mouth. You're getting oral fluid. Doesn't have to do with a bladder. Doesn't have to do with, well, hey, you got to go for your drug test, but I just peed. Okay, but you still have to go. So then they go sit at a collection site for 2 hours waiting to go to the bathroom again. The donor swabs their own mouth, so you're not putting your hand in their face. They're just swabbing their own mouth. So that's a nice positive with this type of program. It very easily indicates when there's enough oral fluid on that device, as I showed in the last slide, that middle picture where it turns blue. Very easy to identify. Yep, there's enough. Thank you so much. Let's remove and put it into the tube. With oral fluid testing, there is a significant increase in the number of positives that you will get as a company. There is a slide later from Quest, and also we'll talk about it with the detection windows. But this was a shock to me when I learned this over a decade ago, and I recognize this, that if a testing window is shorter, so say it's 24 hours compared to a month, why would I get more positives on a shorter detection window test? And that goes back to the idea of cheating. People know how to cheat these tests, and they are cheating them with urine. So you implement an oral fluid testing program, you're going to catch more people that are doing drugs. And with oral fluid, it tests for the parent drug most likely. I'm going to say this properly here, sorry. It's focusing on the parent drug, the parent compound of each drug. It still also detects the metabolite as well in certain drugs. But because it's testing for the parent chemical compound, it's able to detect the drug sooner than what urine does because urine is all metabolized into the urine. So it's only the metabolites, or oral fluid is the parent and in most cases the metabolite as well. So it's a quicker test to be able to identify more recent use. No problem. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the not so good now. Now, this is where we start to get into the harder question of, well, oral fluid seems like the right choice for everybody, cost being a big deterrent, I think, at this point. But there are some other things to take into consideration as well. With urine, we talked about people they don't want to collect pee. There's a stigma around it. They think it's gross. It's hard to get collection sites set up to be able to get people to be new into the industry. When we're trying to build a better collection site network in Canada, trying to get better sites or more people trained in the U.S., to get people to collect urine samples, it's never their favorite part of the job. So it's about trying to get more and more people into the industry. And if it was oral fluid, I think we would get way more collection sites because people just don't want to collect urine. With urine, you need a bathroom and it has to be secured. You have to go through that 10 steps process every time, bluing in the toilet, shut off access to any fresh water, no soap, no cleaning solutions, no garbage bin, remove all that. Bathrooms, you should be spending a fair bit of time making sure that those bathrooms are properly secured every single time. You can do a lot of the prep work ahead of time, but it is the responsibility to make sure it's not only a bathroom, but it's a secured bathroom. Urine is easy to cheat. I talked about the professional drug users. They are going to beat the system. They are preparing for it every day. If they get pulled for a test, they are not worried. They know how to beat that test. The professional drug users are the ones getting away with it. We still are catching a lot of people, but a lot of those are, I made a mistake, or the stories we hear anyways, I made a mistake. Oh, I didn't realize this would show up. I was at a party, and we hear lots of different stories. With urine testing, and this gets to be extreme cases, but we mentioned shy bladders. Shy bladder is when somebody shows up and they cannot produce enough urine to be able to process to the lab. There's a certain minimum amount of liquid that we need. They could be at the clinic up to 3 hours. And if they're at the clinic up to 3 hours, that is a lot of time that they're spending probably on with hours of service. Or maybe it's at the end of their shift and now they're 3 hours delayed before they go home. More commonly, it's about an hour. If you have a shy bladder, it takes about an hour after you consume a controlled amount of water, then you can produce a sample. But there are cases where somebody is there for much, much longer. With urine collections too, we have observed collections. Observed collections are where somebody, a person of same gender, will have to go into the bathroom with another individual because they've tested positive, they've been caught cheating, they're trying to return to work. There's a number of scenarios where this happens. And I have to go into the bathroom with, as a person of same gender, with the driver, female with a female, and have them pull down their pants and underwear to their knees, pull up their shirt above their belly button, do a 360 in front of that person so they expose their body parts to them to show if they have any bladder bags or devices or anything that they're carrying on them. And then we have to observe them urinating into the cup because they've been caught. And it's now they're guilty until they can prove their innocence in this US program. In Canada, that is still followed. There are cases, though, with Canada-only programs where observed collections don't take place just because it is very invasive into their personal space and body. But it is common in the US DOT program that this happens, and it happens very, very often. There are a lot of drivers in the return to work program. It's not, it's again, not a great part about the job, not a great part about urine testing specifically. And with urine, you can detect if somebody has consumed marijuana because it's the metabolite, it's not the parent, it's the metabolite in the urinary tract for up to a month or longer in some cases. It does come down to how quickly they metabolize things in their own body, but I've seen 3 months before, I've seen month, I've seen a couple weeks. There's not an exact science of that detection window specifically, but it can be, say, a month. So if someone smokes a marijuana cigarette or they consume an edible, and that stays in their system, it could stay in their system for, unfortunately, up to a month, even if it was one time, because of their body and how they process it and how it metabolizes in their system. And they get pulled for a random test and they get caught. It's nothing to do with impairment. It's just the fact that they had it in their system, and now it's a violation to a US regulation. All right. With oral fluid testing, some of the not so good, it does have a very short history in comparison to urine testing. And it only was approved by Health and Human Services in 2019. So that is, in this whole industry, how we look at it, that is a very short window of being approved, but it is approved by the Health and Human Services in the US. And then the US government approved it for FMCSA drug and alcohol testing in 2023. But it has a much shorter detection or a much shorter history. The cost is significant because now there are kit costs that aren't covered by the lab. There are collection site charges that are going to be higher. And I put N kits again. So the idea behind N kits is that you might have to pay for multiple kits per appointment because they do the first swab and the collection site says, okay, good, we're going to do your test. Oh, 10 minutes later, there's not enough oral fluid. It didn't turn blue. Okay, that's our first attempt. That's one collection. Now we're going to have you wait, drink water. 10 minutes later, we're going to try your next one. 10 minutes later, they pull out another kit. They do another test. So essentially now you're paying for 2 tests if that person didn't have enough oral fluid the first time. It can happen. Yeah, is it frequently happening? No, especially if the collection sites are doing it properly. There's also an increased cost at the lab. And so that's also something to take into consideration. All of these factors, kit cost, collection site, kit, second collection, and then you also have lab costs higher. And now with these new devices that are going to be purchased, who knows what those costs are going to be. And it could be variable, different places, different costs. We're not sure what it's going to end up finalizing as, but significantly higher. So if you say a urine test is $80, you're probably looking at a single oral fluid test to be around 100 to 120. So you're looking at $20 to $40 more per test, which is a significant amount. When you buy kits, these kits are manufactured, so they also have expiry dates. And that happens, unfortunately, at collection sites where they say, yep, I got my kits. And then they grab one and go, oh, no, it's expired. I can't do your test here today. Or it's another cost to the program because now if you're purchasing your own kits and they expire, you didn't use them. Now it's an added burden and cost to your program for management. So it just adds another element to supply management as well as costs. I have, under oral fluid, increased positive results. Even though I put that as a good, It's also a not so good, but it just depends on the perspective of the person who's attending the presentation or the company. Because some people don't want to deal with more positives. I've had companies ask to switch to oral fluid because they want to decrease their positive rate. But when I tell them it won't happen, you're actually going to see maybe a double of the percentage of people who test positive. Maybe you're 3%, you're going to go to 6. Maybe you're 4, you're going to go to 8. And they ask why, and I have to explain, well, some of it's to do with cheating. And you're going to be catching people who otherwise were cheating. But there's a couple more answers to that. It's not just the cheaters, okay? The not so good too is the shorter detection window of all other drugs. Sure, it reduces marijuana, which I will show in a couple slides from now, the detection window differences, but it also reduces for cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin. These are drugs that if you have a much shorter detection window, you're going to catch less people, you would think, on those as well. But in fact, it actually increases the positivity rate, but there is a shorter detection window. At the collection site, they are supposed to ask the question, have you had anything to eat, drink, chew, smoke in the last 10 to 15 minutes? Because that could affect the ability to produce a sample. Drivers will show up. They can't just go straight into a test, a urine test, which takes about 10, 15 minutes at a collection site. They may have to sit there and wait for 10, 15 minutes before they can even make an attempt to produce an oral fluid sample based on this question. So instead of it being a very quick in and out process for urine, when it is quick, it could actually delay further the testing time at the collection site because of that question, which is necessary to ask. And right now, this is hard to explain in a short period of time, but the Canadian standard for oral fluid testing is single samples. The U.S. urine program is called split samples, 2 tubes. Actually, I got these tubes right here. This level. So these are 2 tubes that we collect urine samples in. In these 2 tubes, you have to have split specimen A and B. A is what's analyzed by the first lab. B is what's analyzed by the second lab if the driver thinks the first lab made a mistake. It allows the driver or employee an opportunity to contest the result, the first result from the lab, and say, nope, lab must have made a mistake. Then they send B to another lab. They analyze it without knowing what the results were, and it gets reported back to the doctor. That opportunity is not available for anybody in Canada that's running a single sample program. The single sample program was standard for a very long time. The US regulated program will be 2 samples. So it's a dual swab, which will require even more oral fluid to be absorbed. So there could be even more cases where there's multiple attempts, multiple costs because of the fact that it requires even more oral fluid than the current program. All right, here's where we get a little bit into the concerns about oral fluid testing. And one of the reasons why the positivity rate does increase in some cases is that if you're a Canadian company or a US company, and maybe you're in a state that marijuana is decriminalized and Canada is legalized in Canada, and your company says, hey, we're going to go to an oral fluid testing program. If they understand the oral fluid testing program detection windows, if they have an understanding, like a grasp on it, then they'll know that they have 24-hour testing window. So that opens up the opportunity to consume cannabis and say, my company says it's okay. But it's the individuals who will push those boundaries. If you say don't use or consume within 24 hours of any shift, it's the same idea as alcohol. Don't consume alcohol within 8 hours of a shift. US regulation says 4, by the way, but we changed that to 8 because of safety reasons. So you say 8 hours. People are still going to drink, what, 6 hours before their shift? Maybe they're out with friends. Maybe they're staying up late watching a sporting event, having a couple extra drinks. They're up until midnight. Then they have to get up at 5. They're not well rested. They've also consumed within that period. They drive to work. Are they being tested at 6 in the morning? So this is where it becomes an abuse of privilege. And not having proper education in place for drivers will really, unfortunately, push that boundary. I say compare it with alcohol. People will push the boundary on alcohol. They will push the boundary on other legal substances. Or they'll start to say, well, it's fine. My company accepts this stuff. I can do this. It's okay. There's a defensibility issue as well. And I talked to companies about this, that if you switch to oral fluid testing, make sure you put your case together. And as long as you have a strong case behind why you're switching to oral fluid, because of that reduced detection window over time, the question is, well, will it cause potential risk or harm later on? Will somebody who's consumed cannabis on all their off days chronically and who now has a higher potential for cognitive decline, or somebody who is using cocaine but not detected as easily, will this put the company at a higher risk? My answer is it shouldn't, so long as you as the company or the advisors or whoever is involved put down a business case of why you're making the change. So you can't just switch it. You don't just want to go, yeah, we're going oral fluid, let's go. You really want to build a business case, policies, develop education, training materials. You don't want to just jump into it and make that switch immediately. You really should be looking at it more as like a larger safety initiative and why you're making this decision as a company to make the switch. So that's where it's not so good, because it's not just a switch. Urine's already in place if you already do it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to change anything. But if you switch to oral fluid, it should be more of a complete program change. All right, this gives you an idea of the detection windows between the two. Now, this comes from 3 different sources to be able to give you a broader range of varying opinion in the industry. If you look at marijuana, though, very specifically, 6 hours to months in urine, where oral fluid, it's within 2 minutes of consumption to 24 hours of detection. And that 24 hours is very accurate. Like, we have people challenge and say, oh, well, they did it 2 days ago. It's 24 hours. They can't claim, well, it was a week ago that I did this in an oral fluid test. The answer is no, you consume within the last 24 hours. And it's because of the 2 minutes to 24 hours, it is closer to probability of impairment at the time, depending on the nanograms from the lab compared to their shift and when they worked and when they were tested. So there are some factors that can be looked at to identify with oral fluid probability of impairment. Never impairment specifically, though. None of this drug testing is impairment testing, even oral fluid, even with shorter detection windows. But you can look at it as potential probability of impairment. Any drug testing program should still be viewed as policy violation. We have a safety program, we have a policy in place. We have a policy to wear a hard helmet on a construction site and safety boots. We have a policy of how to get in and out of a truck safely. These are policies. If you violate the policy, you put yourselves and potentially others at risk. It's the same thing with the drug and alcohol program. It's a policy to inspire and put in place safety protocols and practices to ensure people are fit for work and also get the support that they need if they're not, like an addiction or dependency issues. Cocaine has a much shorter detection window, 36 hours compared to up to 8 days in urine. So this is where you start to see the not so good side. But on the next study, I'll show you on the next slide, Quest Diagnostics, which is one of the biggest labs in the US, came out with a study saying that, well, oral fluid testing has a slightly shorter window of detection than urine, much shorter than in urine, by the way, for marijuana specifically. It demonstrates a higher positivity rate for almost all drugs and more than twice the positivity rate for marijuana. And this came out as a big shock to a lot of people when this study was released. Now, I had been running oral fluid programs prior to this announcement, this study being announced, and I noticed the same thing. I was tracking the positivity rates and I was looking at it saying, it's odd that it's different this way, because companies are switching to oral fluid because maybe marijuana is now legal in Canada, or that's our new national flag, by the way. So just kidding. But marijuana is legal in Canada, and all these people say, hey, if there's legal in Canada, I want my employees to be able to use it, but they can't use it at work. So they switch and they want a reduction of positive rates. They say, hey, I got so many positives this year, and they switch, but then they see an increase. And it goes back to the questions of like, why? And a lot of it had to do with, well, people were cheating before, or now they're pushing they're abusing the privileges, abusing the ability to say, hey, well, my company doesn't care. They let me do this now. It's okay because my company's an oral fluid company. It's a shorter detection window. I probably won't test positive. It's not a problem. And they start to push those boundaries more. All right. Okay. when we look at a program decision, it's going to be individual. It's not going to be a blanket for everybody. Not everyone's going to follow the same programs, protocols. Not everyone's going to have the same budget, same aspirations, the same needs. And when I go out and talk to companies and leading up to understanding what they want, what do you want out of a drug testing program? If the U.S. government and in Canada it's acceptable because we just follow what the U.S. does with drug testing programs and regulations and training and all the stuff that we do, I say, what do you want? And most companies still will say lowest cost, compliance at the lowest cost. And if it's something that's considered the status quo, if it still works in theory, the cheating side and everything else set aside, shy bladder issues, collection sites, no one wants to collect pee. But if all that's put aside to say it doesn't affect me, my program seems to run fine. I have 50 drivers, I have 5 drivers, I have 500 drivers, but my program runs fine. Why would I want to implement a new program and change knowing that I have to make a business case, rewrite policies, do training programs, education for drivers? All that has to be built ahead of time. Maybe you're doing in-house collection, so now you have training and implementation of in-house collection programs as part of this switch to oral fluid. It's a lot of work when all they care about right now is compliance at the lowest cost. And that is pretty common across the entire industry. I have other clients though, and I know other companies that say, nope, oral fluid, we're already doing it in Canada. As soon as it's available for the US, we're going to make the switch. And there's a lot of companies that do oral fluid testing in Canada, and they're just waiting for this to finalize so they can have a standard program across the board. They like the standard, they get higher positivity rate on the oral fluid side. They are happy about that because to them, more positives mean safer roads. Not the opposite of what a lot of people would say, well, I had as the good and not so good. I have other companies say, I don't want positives. If I can live without positives, a positive test result for drugs, my life is better. So the positivity rate increasing adds more anxiety and stress and cost and challenges with now you have more drivers out of work and more trucks that need to be filled, and it just becomes a kind of cyclical challenge and struggle for everybody. Because cannabis is legal in Canada and it's decriminalized in a number of states now, I think it's even beyond that to certain states where it might even be legalized in certain states. The driver shortage is still an issue. I know that there was a bit of a catch up because of the freight drop and everything that happened with tariffs and the challenges with just kind of cross-border employment. But the driver shortage seemed to drop a little bit, but it still exists. It still is a major issue for the industry. And more companies say we can't be that picky anymore. And if we keep saying that it's a urine testing program, which means it's abstinence for marijuana use. You cannot drive a commercial vehicle and be a U.S. DOT regulated driver and use marijuana. You can't be both. You can't be a marijuana user driving in the U.S. Off. It's done. You can't do it. And it's hard for people to grasp that, I think. And when you explain it to them, you say, you just can't use marijuana and drive a truck in the US. That's it. But if companies then could say, now you can, so long as you follow the rules and responsibilities we put in place. Proper, responsible consumption. Here's our rules. Here's our responsibilities. That's where that defensibility starts to come in a challenge because then you have to explain to these drivers what is responsible marijuana use as per your company policies and standards. It could get messy. So that should be a standard education across the industry of the 24-hour rule. They call it the half-life of marijuana in your system, potential cognitive functions decline. There's a number of different things that can come up, but you just want to make sure that you understand the reasons why you're making those decisions. And we get companies saying, well, can we do both? Is there a better way? And the answer is yeah. U.S. regulations said that you can do urine and oral fluid testing and deciding when to do each one. You can't be per person. It has to be maybe per standard drug test. Every pre-employment is going to be oral fluid, or every pre-employment is going to be urine. Our randoms are going to be oral fluid. Our post-accidents are going to be this. If they arrive at the collection site and it's urine and there's a shy bladder, they can do an oral fluid. Or if there is, they go to an oral fluid, but all the kits are expired, they can do a urine. So that becomes a lot messier of a policy to write and to manage. There's potential for more issues and gaps. To be able to manage a blended program, we're really going to need to better educate our third-party collection sites. And that's on an initiative that I have in place where we are going to start doing education courses for third-party collection sites on understanding oral fluid testing before we even start training them on oral fluid collections for US DOT regulations. We want to educate them on how this might look in a complicated scenario, or where are the variables, or what does inventory management look like. So we really got to build out this kind of model with the collection sites in Canada, and then in the US through all these different business partners that we have, and Abbott and all the different labs and CRL and Omega, they all have to kind of figure out how they're going to manage this through their program because it could get messy. Now, one of the ways that I know that Nordux is going to be working on this is with Carrier's Edge. And Carrier's Edge is looking at launching their own, they already have launched collector training courses for urine. Alcohol is coming soon through the Carrier's Edge platform, and we utilize that for our staff and our partners as well. But one of the big things that's going to be coming, I think would be helpful for a lot of you to complete when it's ready, is the US DOT oral fluid collector training course. You don't even have to be certified in the end. There's a whole separate live mock collection certification portion to it. But to at least do the online training program will continue your education on this topic and understand from a collection site level what is necessary, what's the procedures, what are the challenges, what's a fatal flaw, why are tests canceled, how does it get fixed? All that's built into this amazing training course that should be launched, I would think, before the end of the year. Michael, I'm not sure the exact date, but it will be coming out before, obviously, this program is launched by the US government. Okay, I did okay, Michael. I was checking my own time too, so
You
I only went
did.
2 minutes over.
You did. You nailed it. That was great. And I'm not going to commit to a time frame because I know our director of content, Deanna, is on here and she'll kill me if I say things. So, but thank you for that. And thanks, Chris. That was fantastic. Do have a question that's come in here. And by the way, if you do have questions, please drop them into the Q&A. We've got a few minutes left here that we can get to any questions that people have. Question here: if I'm setting up a new company policy for a company to test non-DOT, do I still use a stranded drug and alcohol agreement? Dave, safety and compliance, PEI.
Right. There's a couple ways to look at Canada-only programs. The first one is, does the company have US drivers to start with? If they have US drivers and you want to now implement one for Canadian drivers, even if you're testing oral fluid and one's testing urine, you can just mirror those policies together. You can follow the same standards, the same testing requirements, pre-employment, random testing, have them consistent, because consistency is one of the best ways for you to be able to defend your program. If your Canada-only program is managed one way and it's completely off from your US program, there's a higher potential for errors and mistakes to be made between crossover and understanding the policies. Well, I did it this way on this one. Do I do it that way on this one? It becomes harder to manage. And there's enough case law in Canada that goes back to the foundation of drug and alcohol testing in Canada, which is all based on the US regulations. The doctors are trained based on US requirements, the MROs, the labs are all set up based on lab requirements, the testing panels are all set to US requirements for testing panels. You also want to look at the Canadian model for providing a safe workplace. It is the Construction and Energy Drug and Alcohol Guidance document out in Alberta. It's called the Canadian model, though, and it's being actually adopted as the Canadian model across all industries. So it's also something really good to have as part of your policy development and review, just how you're going to be managing a program. But as I say, go back to what you use on the Canadian or on the US side, because throughout that Canadian model document, it references US. There's a section about supervisor training. It says, just do what the US does. Literally, pretty much, I'm not saying verbatim, but it tells you, just test based on the US DOT drug and alcohol standards for supervisor training. It's a small paragraph saying, just do what the US does. And it also has all the testing panels. It shows the testing panels and the drugs to be included. And it includes the US DOT FMCSA requirements. So you'll see throughout that document, it just references you back to the US regulations. But if it's a Canada trucking company that already goes into the US, easiest thing to do is just to put put the Canadian drivers into a mirror program of the US, and then you can make slight modifications, like what collection are you going to do? Is it going to be urine for our US drivers based on the regulations? Okay. All the same standards, except it's going to be oral fluid for our Canadian drivers. And there are a lot of companies in Canada that do that.
Awesome, thanks. So if we were having this I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball. If we're having this conversation a year from now, where do you think that the industry is going to move? Do you see oral fluid becoming more popular? Do you see the status quo maintaining? What do you think is going to happen?
I had to put together a financial model for this,
Ah, all right.
financial forecasting, and I had to push it back a year because of the lab challenges. I didn't anticipate the labs being so challenged with getting their technology to work. Um, so we're probably another year, I would say, before companies will start to have to make this decision.
Okay.
And it's not a must be made on the day it's launched. The day one, say it's July of next year, and all of a sudden the labs are set up. We got 2 labs, and everything gets announced that we can move forward. There's still going to be development and program setup gaps. So then I would tell companies plan for 6 months
Mhm.
for policy redevelopment, education planning, strategic planning, financial planning, and build out 3 to 6 month plan for that. So for me, I would think it's about 25% of all tests for truck drivers will switch to oral fluid once it's available. Once we get about 2 years into the program, I've anticipated about 50-50.
Hmm.
And at that point, I don't see it changing more because of the cost, unless oral fluid costs come down. And if it becomes more prevalent, more common, the costs start to get better managed by the lab, supply costs, everything gets better managed, collection side level, then I can almost see it going to a 75-25 split or offset for oral fluid if the cost is down. But right now, cost is one of the biggest barriers. So 50-50 is, I think, as close as we're going to get. I think it'll take a couple years. And I still think we're about 6 months probably away from the labs being ready.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, we got one last question here in the Q&A that I think we have time for. So the feds have put trucking companies in a tough spot by legalizing marijuana. I'm curious how a police officer determines if a driver is impaired by THC at a roadside stop. Do they do a follow-up urine or saliva test if impairment is noted?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Okay. There's no roadside impairment test, specifically like a
Yeah.
swab or a urine test on the roadside. There's no breath test that they've been able to get their hands on. They've trialed breath testing for marijuana, just like with an alcohol test, which is it's an impairment test. They haven't been able to get that figured out yet. So the way that the police services, from my understanding, is they will have a reason they pull somebody over. And then when they approach the vehicle, they're looking for specific observations. There are very distinct ones, like the smell of marijuana, or there are ones where they're physical that they're looking at. Their eyes is one of the biggest tells to be able to identify when you're trained on it, the signs and symptoms of impairment. This is also part of other training programs I do as well. Once they've identified that there's a potential, now they're going to go through their required steps. And the required steps for the police officer is to say, okay, how probable is this, my observations, to leading to me to believe that this person could be impaired to high risk. Once they make that determination without any testing, this is just visual, reason I pulled you over, and visual impairment tests that they do, then they could also put them through the sobriety test on the roadside, like touch your nose, walk a straight line, certain things like that. If they get to a point where they say, yes, like I'm not going to allow this person to drive, they would send them back to the station. And there's 2 individuals that would get involved. One is a phlebotomist, which does a blood draw. So they do blood draw because it is the most accurate test for impairment. It has the shortest detection window. It's too invasive for employers to do, but police services, they are able to do it, law enforcement. The other one is they have a drug expert, a drug recognition expert. And there was a whole course that they have to go through. It's in the US. And apparently, I'm just learning about it years ago, though, but they go to Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, I think is where it is, because of the substantial amount of drug and variation of drug use. And they go down there and they have to study people who are high. And they have to like observe them and watch them and learn about their eyes and go through a whole understanding of how they react and how they act. And so they go through a whole drug recognition expert course that they have to be certified then as a drug recognition expert. And then I believe they have to sign off on it. But if there's no one available and you refuse to do a blood draw, then that refusal is enough to say that you're impaired. So the police service. I don't get involved in. I'm telling you what I've learned. I'm not speaking to that from an expert position. I've just attended enough education sessions and talked to police officers that I've learned this. It's not something I get involved in. We just stay out of the police services side of it. We're just occupational testing, U.S. regulations, Canadian landscape, and trucking is our major focus. Now, even with the long list of industries that I've worked with, I've decided to dedicate my expertise and career to trucking and transportation.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Chris. That was great. Super informative. Really appreciate that. Thanks everybody for coming out today. As I mentioned off the top, so we did record this session. We will be sending out a link to the recording in the coming days, along with a copy of Chris's slides too. If you do have any questions about this, you can email us here, support@carriersedge.com. Give us a call, or Chris's contact information he shared earlier, and we'll have that in the follow-up email that goes out as well. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much. Take care.